And I'll be introducing our next speaker, William I. Robinson, who is a professor of sociology and global and international studies, Latin American and Iberian studies, and also affiliated with the faculty Chicana and Chicano studies at the University of California, Santa Barbara. Robinson spent the 1980s in Nicaragua and says that it was his experience during the Sandinista revolution that shaped him politically and intellectually. After the defeat of that struggle for liberation, Robinson undertook a study to determine why it failed. This put him on the road to more fully exploring the drive of the world's elites towards ever greater austerity and repression. He has spent the last 20 years writing extensively about the global economy and how it is undergirding a drive toward authoritarianism on a world scale. He is a supporter of Mayday Strong. His recent books include Epochal Crisis, The Exhaustion of Global Capitalism, The Global Police State, and Can Global Capitalism Endure? So, without further ado, please welcome our next guest, William I. Robinson.
Can I move the podium a little bit, or is that possible? Is that the microphone? This is recording. Okay. Thank you so much for that generous introduction. And hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm so grateful for this invitation, and especially Chris Gavro, who contacted me, I guess, a month ago or so. It's a privilege to be with you here today. I can't imagine a more urgent, timely meeting to be taking place with what we're facing now. I'm going to pack in a whole lot, so I'm going to start right away. And I have to tell you, I did grow up with salsa music, and I'm going to time myself, and in 29 minutes from now, you are going to hear a salsa song, and I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to jump right into this. Worldwide, and you know this, we are living a moment of extreme tension and uncertainty. We are staring fascism in the face as a project that is not yet consolidated. Thanks to our resistance, our ongoing resistance, we face the threat of World War III, the genocide in Gaza. If it is allowed to continue with impunity, is going to open the door to other genocides. The biosphere is collapsing. We are entering a period of great upheavals. The old world that we knew is rapidly disappearing. And let me put it like this. We are experiencing the vertigo of a world capitalist system that is disintegrating. We are moving from one epoch to another in a moment of profound historical significance, and we are in the fight of our lives. It's never been more clear that it's only proletarian power that can save us now. So what I want to do is step back from the headlines, from the immediate events, and I want to present the big picture. I really think that we need radical theory, we need radical analysis, we need to ask the big questions. What is Trumpism all about? Where did these global Trumpisms come from? Why is fascism spreading all over the world? Why this unbelievable brutality, this brutal war, terrorist war against immigrants? Why the genocide in Palestine, and why now that genocide? So the backdrop to all of this, to everything we're discussing here today, to everything going on in the world, the backdrop is what we can call the epochal crisis of global capitalism. And we have to see Trumpism as a response to that crisis. The crisis is economic and structural, but it's also political, it's social, it's ecological, of course. In fact, the ecological dimensions make this crisis existential. We're at the precipice of the collapse of the biosphere. The world capitalist system that we live in is becoming exhausted, and the key question is, can we move beyond this system before it takes all of humanity down with it? So we talk, in radical political economy, we talk about three types of crises. There are cyclical crises, recessions, or the mainstream calls it the business cycles. They take place about once every 10 years. But we're not in a cyclical crisis. We're in the next type of crisis, which is much more serious, a deep structural crisis. The only way out of these structural crises is to radically restructure and reorganize the whole system of capitalism. So there were structural crises in the 1930s, the Great Depression. Then again in the 1970s, a big structural crisis. Then the global financial collapse of 2008 launched us into a new structural crisis, which has not been resolved, but it's not only, and is getting worse and worse, but it's pushing us towards the third type of crisis, which we call a systemic crisis, meaning the only way to resolve this crisis from the viewpoint of humanity is now to move beyond the system itself. So the first dimension of this crisis, because they're all interlinked, it's a single crisis of global capitalism with these different dimensions, is economic or structural. And it's what we call technically a crisis of overaccumulation, of chronic stagnation, of an ongoing decline in the rate of profit. This concept of overaccumulation, it's the most fundamental contradiction of capitalism. It's because there's too much accumulated profits. The corporations, the capitalist class has too much profits. They don't know what to do with it, and so things stagnate. The big question, how did we get not only to 2008, but now to 2025? How did we get to this point? Well, we have to briefly take the story back to the 1960s and 1970s. This was a time of radical mass struggles all over the world. There were national liberation struggles. There were anti-colonial struggles. Here in the United States, we had the black liberation struggles, the Chicano liberation struggles, the radicalization of the trade union and worker movement, the student struggles, the radical feminist struggles dating back to the 1960s, and so forth and so on. We can go on. But all of this meant that the ruling classes, the capitalist class, was on the defensive, and they launched a massive counteroffensive against the world's people, the world's working and popular classes, by launching globalization and neoliberalism from the 1980s and on, in an effort to restore profit rates, to rediscipline us, the masses of poor and popular classes all around the world, to restore the rate of profit, so forth and so on. We all know this story. In the global north here in the United States, deindustrialization, precaritization, downward spiral for the vast majority of the working population, the move to capital, to cheap labor zones, precarity spreading all over the global working classes, precariousness. This is the counteroffensive, the radical globalization and neoliberal counteroffensive of the ruling groups. Really, globalization that we've experienced for the last half century can be seen as transnational capitalist class warfare against the global working and popular classes. But then this globalization boom comes to an end with the global financial collapse of 2008. And the transnational capitalist class, what happens here? They accumulate up until 2008, and since then even more. They accumulate more money than they can spend, much less reinvest. This is what we call technically surplus capital. These vast quantities of capital that have nowhere to go. And the thing is, that means it's idle capital. And capital has to continue to accumulate. It cannot be idle. If there's capital is idle, that is a state of crisis. And it brings us all down with it. Capital has to expand. It's like riding a bicycle. You stop pedaling the bicycle, it slows down, and it falls over. Capitalism stops expanding outward. It stops conquering new territories and new peoples and new markets and seizing new resources. It goes into crisis. And we are in the precipice of another giant crisis, something which may go beyond the financial collapse of 2008. And for me, it's not a question of if that crisis will take place, it's when, and it may be a lot sooner than we think. So the great challenge that the ruling classes face right now is how to expand, how to continue accumulating capital, how to unload this enormous surplus profits that it's just sitting on, how to continue making profits. And so they've been pursuing, especially since 2008, but before also, three ways of continuing to expand and make profit that are, and keep the global economy going, that are unsustainable. One is debt. Debt is at an all-time high. It's at $300 trillion worldwide, whereas the whole global economy is only worth $100 trillion. And consumer debt, we're maxed out, not just here in the United States, worldwide. Working class can't assume any more debt. And then there's state debt. The state has been going into all of this debt, but not for us, not to help us workers, but has been going unbelievable levels of state debt, and that's at a cracking point. And then there is all of this speculation, unbelievable amounts of speculation. There's no time here to go into it, but it boggles the mind, the levels of speculation, and that's producing multiple bubbles. One bubble is cryptocurrency. That's nothing but a speculative instrument. It has nothing to do with real wealth and real people like us. But the biggest bubble right now is artificial intelligence, and it's going to bust, and that might be the trigger to bring about this next crisis and collapse. So these outlets to continue having the global economy move forward at a time of profound overaccumulation and stagnation, they're becoming exhausted. They're not doing the trick anymore. So the transnational capitalist class is in this desperate search for outlets to unload surplus capital. That means it is seeking to, and doing it, violently cracking open new spaces for global accumulation all around the world, in the United States and all around the world. And so right now, the ruling classes, the capitalist states that are the instruments of the transnational capitalist class, they're engaged in this vast, digitally driven restructuring and transformation of global capitalism. We're seeing right now this worldwide round of predatory expansion, of extractivist seizure of resources, the expansion of wars and conflicts, displacement of millions, and repression. This is what's taking place behind the headlines, this imminent war with Venezuela, the war against immigrants and ICE terrorism, and so forth. And above all, what these ruling classes and the transnational capitalist class here, but also I'm speaking about the whole world, what they're seeking to do now is to transfer the costs of the crisis onto the working and popular classes. And we need to be clear about this, that global Trumpisms is an all-out attack on the working classes as capitalist states assume authoritarian, dictatorial, and fascist forms as instruments. These capitalist states assuming those forms as instruments for capitalist class warfare. They are seeking, as we know very well, to smash whatever remains of the regulatory state, to smash and eliminate whatever remains of the social welfare state, total privatization, the pulverization of wages, the repression of unions, the containment, and really the extermination of surplus humanity, a concept that I'll get back to in just a moment, to lock us all into permanent precarity and vulnerability. And so also to counter stagnation and also to counter the actual rebellion underway amongst us, the masses of people in the world, but also the potential rebellion. They are deepening what I call militarized accumulation and accumulation by repression, meaning that repression and wars and so forth are a way of making profit and getting out of stagnation in and of themselves, and they are also an instrument for smashing resistance to this system. So we're seeing the rapid militarization of the whole economy and society, and the expansion of what I refer to as the global police state. I think in the introduction you mentioned that my book, The Global Police State, that's the very title of the book. Numerous examples, no time to go into them, but again, think what's going on right now in Venezuela. Think about ICE terrorism. Think about genocide in Palestine. Those are expressions of a global police state seeking to turn repression and death and destruction and barbarity into profit at a time of stagnation and to repress our struggles. So that's the economic or structural dimension. The political dimensions of the crisis is this is a crisis of state legitimacy, of capitalist hegemony, and of geopolitical confrontation. The Cato Foundation, which is a libertarian, right-wing libertarian foundation, in March of this very year, they released a survey. And this is incredible. The survey was of 18 to 29 years old in the United States, Gen Z. And 62% of those young people in that category said they preferred socialism over capitalism. And 34% said they have no problem with communism. That is a sea change, right? And so that represents, that indicates, and by the way, Gen Z is in rebellion all over the world, come back and talk to that mention that later on if there's time. So there is this rising class consciousness and class struggle in the United States, all over the world. Social explosions are already taking place everywhere, and so the ruling groups are facing a crisis of social control. And bourgeois democracy is becoming an obstacle to capitalist expansion. So we're seeing these new forms of the capitalist state. We're seeing Trumpism is emblematic of these new forms of the capitalist state, and this shift from what we can call technically consensual domination to outright open coercive domination of the masses of working class people and the poor. And so globally we're seeing the rise of states of exception. State of exception is when there's a suspension of the normal rule of law, constitutional order, and so forth. We're seeing it all over the world, and Trump has been threatening, as you know, to invoke the Insurrection Act and the breakdown of the rule of law, but that's part of what's going on worldwide. Really, fascists are organizing transnationally all over the world, and they are getting a big lead over us on this organizing, transnational fascist organizing. Some of the people it's not just the individuals we should focus on, but they're symbolic of this transnational fascism is Trump, Netanyahu, of course, Milei in Argentina, Bukele in El Salvador, Noboa in Ecuador, Bolsonaro in Brazil, Orban in Hungary, Erdogan in Turkey, Nigel Farage and the Reform Party in the UK. I mean, we can go on and on about this. These are figures that symbolize something larger that is going on. And then we have the escalation of geopolitical confrontation. Global markets are saturated. There's vast industrial overcapacity. States are competing for markets, for resources. They're competing to externalize the crisis, a triple externalization. States are externalizing the crisis onto us, the working classes, working and popular classes. Secondly, they're trying to externalize it onto other states. So Trump's tariffs is an effort to externalize it both onto the working class and onto other states, or making China become a boogeyman, that's externalizing the crisis to other states, and they're externalizing the crisis onto scapegoats, especially right now in the United States, immigrants. So it's crucial to understand, though, that behind Trumpism is the transnational capitalist class. We might think it's the reverse. Trump is in control and he tells capitalists and us workers and everyone else what to do. No, that's what it looks like on the surface. It is the reverse, really, the relationship here. The transnational capitalist class is a global ruling class. We are living in a dictatorship, literally, of the transnational capitalist class, because transnational capital dictates what's going to happen. And Trumpism is an instrument of the transnational capitalist class, and this is literally, but think the image here, like the symbolic image of Trump's inauguration, when behind him, right there, are the leading billionaires in the United States, Musk and Zuckerberg and Bezos and Jamie Dimon, who's the head of Morgan Chase City, and Sam Alter and so forth. That is the ruling class behind Trump, and Trump is their instrument. And Musk is really, everything he did, really the archetypical politicized grouping within the transnational capitalist class, manipulating and controlling directly emerging authoritarian and fascist states. And Trump, by the way, is going around the world organizing and mobilizing fascism. It's not just here. Sorry, did I say Trump? I meant Musk. Trump is doing the same thing too, of course. So we're seeing the rise of this new hegemonic block of capital that brings together tech capital, the giant tech capital, with the military-industrial complex, with transnational finance capital. These three groups of capital are fusing together into a new hegemonic block of capital. Silicon Valley is rapidly pivoting towards war and repression. Palantir, that corporation, that horrible corporation, is really the archetype of the face of this corporate fascist future. And then this hegemonic block of capital is now aligning itself with the fascist state. Again, Musk is really symbolic here. And by the way, they have named the chief technology officers of these corporations, they've named them lieutenant colonels in the U.S. Army. This is the fusion of this tech corporation with the military. I mean, it's something unbelievable. No time to go into detail here. But what's going on is the fascist state heightens digital control alongside military control, and the fascist state, again, the fascist project is not consolidated. It's trying to consolidate, and we're pushing back. The fascist state opens up enormous new spaces for accumulation, and it promises the transnational capitalist class that it will open up these spaces to make profit, and secondly, it promises that it will exercise social control and attack the working classes everywhere. So in the big picture, why? What's going on here? And so we have to look at this, that there has been an unprecedented global concentration of wealth and of power in the transnational capitalist class over the last 5 decades. Unbelievable concentration of wealth and power. My colleague and friend, Peter Phillips, he wrote this book, Giants, and in 2020 it came out, and he pointed out in 2018, just 17 global financial conglomerates controlled $42 trillion, more than half the entire global economy, just 17 global financial conglomerates. And they're interlocked. They have these networks spanning the globe. That's what we loosely call the billionaire class, if you want to call it that. So there's this enormous concentration of economic power on a planetary scale. And so now that is translating into enormous political control. We've had this dictatorship of the transnational capitalist class. We need to call that economic totalitarianism. And now economic totalitarianism is bringing about its counterpart in the political system, political totalitarianism. The political reality now, this new fascism and authoritarianism, that's the political reality adjusting to the economic reality we've had for the last 5 decades. This power block is being reconfigured. What's left of the working class inside the power block is being fully expelled. And what is explosive now is this combination of expanding coercive power of the fascist state with the new digital and military capacities provided by this hegemonic bloc of capital. So the Trumpist project, the transnational capitalist class project, it cannot be accomplished through the rule of law. The rule of law in the United States is breaking down. Again, we're pushing back. We're pushing back, but they're trying to break it down. And let's not even talk about international law, because it's kind of a joke, because the ruling powers in the world don't even acknowledge it. So the institutions of bourgeois democracy simply cannot manage this crisis. They're trying to create new forms of legitimacy, rule by force and decree. And what is being normalized here are mafioso states. You see the Trump and unbelievable brazen corruption right in our face, but that's all over the world right now. These mafioso elites engage in the utmost brazen cruelty and corruption, and with impunity, so long as these states continue to serve transnational corporate interests. That's the political dimensions of the crisis. I'm not going to talk about the ecological, but the other 3. Economic I've spoken about, political I've spoken about. I want to turn to the social dimensions of the crisis. This is a crisis of social reproduction, of widespread social disintegration everywhere. Billions of people cannot survive, and every day more and more people cannot survive. The social fabric is collapsing everywhere. Whole communities are collapsing. Whole regions, countryside in Mexico, in the U.S., in rural areas and in inner urban areas. The social fabric is collapsing. Whole countries are collapsing in the face of this crisis. Think of Haiti. Think of Sudan. And so I spoke earlier about surplus capital, this trillions of dollars accumulated by the transnational capitalist class. They don't know what to do with it. It's idle. But always, the alter ego of surplus capital has always been surplus labor. So this is a crucial concept to understand what's going on right now. Surplus humanity. Those sectors of humanity, and we're talking about more than 2 billion people now, and growing very rapidly, including in the United States, just thrown away, thrown out of the system, of no use to transnational capital, to the ruling classes. They don't consume because too low of an income or no income, don't generate surplus value for capital, of no purpose for capital. So capital, the ruling classes, the system, has no need for the social reproduction of these sectors of the working class, and the ranks are constantly expanding. Many of us are being pushed into those ranks of surplus humanity. We have to remember that social polarization is inherent to capitalism. It's not an aberration that you have to fix capitalism. By its very dynamics of functioning, capitalism produces wealth on one end and extreme misery and polarization on the other end. So this rising inequality is normal capitalism. The only thing that reverses it is mass struggle from below to produce what we call counter-tendencies, things that offset that polarization. And we did that in the 1930s. And I'm just talking about the United States here, but also all around the world. We did that in the 1960s and 70s. Then capital launched its counter-offensive, globalization, neoliberalism, and everything that's been going on. And that has also left the working classes fragmented and weakened, and states with less ability to capture surpluses and us to pressure states to do so and to redistribute them. So what has this led to? A dizzying process of polarization and inequality, simply unprecedented. Right now, 1% of humanity controls 53% of the world's wealth. 20% of humanity, maybe many of us here fit into that 20%, can at least survive. We can survive in global capitalism, and that 20% controls 95% of the world's wealth. That means 80% of humanity has to make do with just 5% of the world's wealth. And even that 20% is a misrepresentation, because that was a number of years ago. With AI, with all the transformations taking place, that's whittling down to 15, 12, 10% of humanity can survive in this system. With that level of inequality, global markets cannot absorb the output of the global economy. And that's why since 1980s, we've seen an ongoing dismantling of social welfare states, their transition into social control states, to the global police state. And now Trump comes along, and Trumpism comes along, and they're going to finish the job, accelerate that job. This is also the significance of this, the war against migrants worldwide. Transnational migrant labor is a product of capitalist globalization, displacing millions of people around the world. Then they're forced to migrate, and then when you migrate, you do not have citizenship status, so you are super exploitable and you are super controllable. That's the type of workforce that the whole transnational capitalist class wants. ICE terrorists, they are the new brown shirts, the new shock troops. And what is the goal here? We need to focus on two things. First, the goal here of this system of Trumpism is to make native workers as exploitable as immigrant workers, because the war on immigrants is a war on the entire working class, to make us all experience generalized precarity. And this is why also, I want to stress this, defense of immigrant workers is the very front line of the defense of the entire working class. Artificial intelligence is a strategy for the expansion of the powers of capital. It doesn't have to be under a different system. It could be fantastic. Okay. And artificial intelligence is accelerating the crisis. Xiaomi, which is a Chinese company which produces inside China smartphones for the Asian, mostly for the Asian market, they now have, their biggest factory is now what they themselves call a lights-out factory, a dark factory, 0 human employers, and they make 1 smartphone every second. And so it's all around the world, artificial intelligence is going to expand the ranks of surplus humanity, including knowledge workers. You may have seen that Amazon just said it's going to fire 500,000 workers and replace them with robots. Why? Of course, the workers started to organize in Amazon just a couple years ago. So the ruling class faces this intense crisis about how do you contain and control rebellious surplus humanity. That's the crisis of control I mentioned. And that is where the fascist project comes into play as the mechanism, as the instrument for this containment and the resolution of this crisis of control. And so global capitalism's extermination impulse, which is built into capitalism, is now rising to the surface, and that extermination impulse expresses itself with 3 options for the ruling class. The first option is the Gaza option, outright genocide of surplus humanity. The Palestinians in Gaza are surplus humanity, and you just genocide them. So Gaza is a laboratory, and look what happened in Rio with this massacre of 130 people in the favela in Rio, and look what's going on in Congo. That is the Gaza option for the ruling groups, outright genocide, extermination. The second option they have is the Salvadoran option. The Secot prison holds 40,000 prisoners, and after that was opened up in 2024, a lot of other countries around the world said, hey, fantastic, we're going to build 40, 50, 60,000 prisons for up to 60,000 people. So mass incarceration of surplus humanity. The third option the ruling classes have is abandonment and containment. So you see that in the United States, where whole rural communities, 100,000 people die of opioid epidemics, and by the way, that's not because of drugs coming from Venezuela, it's because of prescription drugs and pharmaceutical companies here. So this global police state, which is intensifying, has that double function to reiterate. One, repress and control and even eliminate and exterminate surplus humanity and the global working and popular classes. And also, it is incredibly profitable in the face of stagnation. Genocide is massively profitable. Hey, there's no time. I'm just about out of time. I haven't heard that song yet, but I know it's coming. But the ruling classes fear mass uprisings, and all of these different things are coming together. So my final comments are our fight back. Now, I have to say, you guys are union organizers. You guys are in the front lines. Who am I? I'm nobody to speak about what we should be doing in our fight back. I just want to make some comments on reflections on our fight back. First of all, the global proletariat, that's our class. We are the largest class in history. We are 5 billion strong. The Intifada, in solidarity with Palestine, it's very clear what's going on here. It's sparking a deeper global intifada against injustice and power from above. And we have these uprisings of Gen Z all over, and you remember that Cato Institute survey. So transnational consciousness is rising now. Transnational struggle is underway. Global capitalism is becoming exhausted, as I said, and the youth stand at the frontiers of this exhaustion. There's rising class consciousness and struggle. There is what we can call the emergence of a world historic, world systemic awareness of what's going on here, especially among the youth. But here is the thing. They lack, these uprisings all around the world, lack a concrete project of transformation. So that's a giant challenge that we have. We know what we're against. We have these uprisings, but what are we going to replace it with? We don't want to repeat the Arab Spring where dictatorships are overthrown, but then there's a vacuum because there's no alternative project to take its place, and we go right back to even worse dictatorships. We need, and again, you guys are union organizers, so please, I have no right to say this, but I want to say it anyway, that we need a broader conception of unions because everyone needs to be organized. So if you're students, if you're unemployed, if you're surplus, we need to look at the global working class as not just those that have regular full-time jobs that can join the traditional unions, that too, of course, but all of the members of the global working class that aren't full-time employed or anything. And then I want to conclude, this is the very last thing I'll say, even so I haven't heard that song yet, that's great. But so this is my conclusion. There are 3 contradictions when seen from the viewpoint of the ruling classes that we need to identify so we can take advantage of these contradictions internal to the Trumpist project, internal to the global capitalist project, internal to this ruling class project that we are fighting. One of the contradictions internal to it is that fascist projects, these type of projects, they can't exist without a mass base. So they're using racism and everything else to try and organize a mass base, but there's no payoff for any members of the working class. It's not like fascism of the 1930s in Italy and Germany, where even though that they organized a working class base and they were at least able to give those workers employment, sure, in fascist industries under Nazi control, but there were employment and public programs. There it is. So, Oscar de León, no llorarás. So I just finished this point and I'm done. So that's the first contradiction. There's no payoff for the fascist project to organize a working class base. Secondly, the fractions of capital, I mentioned that hegemonic bloc, but there's a lot of fractions of capital itself, of the capitalist class, that love what Trumpism and fascism is doing in terms of smashing workers, but don't love other things they're doing. So there's contradictions between the fascist and the capitalist states and the capitalist class itself that we need to take advantage of. And third, the third contradiction there is that the political elite itself is extremely, historically, unbelievably divided. The political elites are fighting amongst themselves, and you saw that National Presidential Security Memorandum 7 was just released. I mean, it says if you're anti-Christian, if whatever, I mean, these ridiculous things, you're going to be criminalized. That's extremely dangerous for all of us. But then it mentioned, and who are the enemies? This Trump memorandum? It's the Democrats, the mainstream Democrats. So of course they're in the same camp, not ours. But here's the thing, that they're calling mainstream Democrats extreme left enemies that need to be repressed is a sign of this crisis within the political elite and the ruling class, and we need to take advantage of their crisis, their internal crisis. Thank you.
Clap it up, clap it up. Clap it up. Clap it up. William Robinson, everybody.